Today we are going to explore one of the greatest mysteries of the past, how people slept in the Middle Ages and why their sleep habits may have been healthier than ours. Before continuing with the video, remember to subscribe to the channel for more documentary narratives like this one. Imagine waking up at 2 in the morning. The house is in absolute silence. The darkness is so dense that you can barely see your own hands. In modern society, this nightly awakening would be a reason for frustration, perhaps even medical concern. You would probably stay staring at the ceiling, counting the minutes until the alarm clock rings. But about 600 years ago, in a small village in medieval Europe, this same awakening would be received in a completely different way. In fact, people of that time would consider it perfectly normal for you to be awake at this hour. More than that, they would probably wonder why you were not doing something productive with these precious hours of nightly silence. This is the story of how our medieval ancestors developed a sleep system that worked perfectly for centuries. A system that modern science is only beginning to understand, and that may contain answers to the insomnia problems that afflict millions of people in the contemporary world. The journey begins with a discovery that surprised historians and sleep scientists alike. By examining medieval documents, personal letters, and medical texts of the time, researchers found repeated references to something they called first sleep and second sleep. Why would someone refer to sleep in this way, as if it were divided into two distinct parts? The answer to this question would reveal a pattern of rest completely different from everything we know today. In medieval communities, nightfall marked the beginning of a carefully structured nightly routine. When darkness fell, people retired for what they called the first sleep. This period of rest lasted approximately 4 hours. Families settled into their beds and fell asleep with the arrival of the night. Around midnight, something interesting happened. People woke up naturally, not because of external noises, but because their bodies simply finished this first phase of sleep. And then, instead of trying to go back to sleep immediately, they got up. Historians now call this a biphasic sleep pattern. What happened during these hours of wakefulness between the two periods of sleep reveals much about medieval life. Houses came to life in subtle ways. In the modest dwellings of peasants, men and women took advantage of this time for quiet conversations. Monastery records from the time show that monks used these hours for their deepest prayers and spiritual contemplation. It was believed that the mind, in this state between the two sleeps, was especially receptive to connection with the divine. Some members of the community used this period for practical activities. By the dim light of a single candle, people wrote letters or worked on small crafts. These were not unwanted interruptions of sleep. They were essential parts of the daily rhythm. Records from various medieval cities reveal that artisans frequently took advantage of these early morning hours to check their ovens. Bakers began to prepare their dough during this period, taking advantage of the perfect fermentation time. Even in the wealthiest houses, these hours had their specific uses. Ladies of the nobility used this time to dedicate themselves to embroidery, away from the demands of the day. After approximately 2 hours of wakefulness, people returned to their beds for the second sleep, which extended until dawn. This pattern was as natural to them as breathing. No one questioned if it was the correct way to sleep, because it was simply how everyone slept. What makes this pattern truly fascinating is what modern science has discovered about it. In the decade of the 1990s, researchers isolated volunteers from any source of artificial light for several weeks, allowing their bodies to follow only the natural rhythms of light and darkness. The result was surprising. Without alarm clocks and without bright screens, the participants naturally adopted the same biphasic sleep pattern that their medieval ancestors practiced. The practice left its marks on medieval literature as well. The famous Canterbury Tales mention characters who got up between sleeps for various adventures. Domestic guides of the time provided specific recommendations about appropriate activities for these early morning hours. Medieval medical texts show that doctors of the time considered this nightly wakefulness beneficial for health. They believed it helped with everything from digestion to mental clarity. One doctor wrote that the dreams of the first sleep could reveal illnesses, while the period between sleeps was perfect for contemplating their meaning. Archaeological evidence from medieval houses reveals how widespread this practice was throughout Europe. Excavations discovered dedicated niches for sitting in common houses, designed especially for these nightly activities. Special supports for long and thin candles, perfect for midnight reading, were found in homes of all social classes. For medieval people, this nightly wakefulness was not just about being awake. It was about experiencing a unique state of consciousness that they called the watch hour. They believed this time possessed special qualities. Prayers were more likely to be answered. Creative thoughts flowed more freely. Although we may see their beliefs as superstitious, modern sleep studies have demonstrated that this period between sleep phases often produces a distinct state of relaxed alertness. And in those peaceful hours of darkness, with only the soft flicker of a candle for company, medieval people discovered another secret to perfect sleep: absolute darkness. Modern bedrooms often look like Times Square at midnight, with glowing phones and blinking electronics. In contrast, medieval nights knew a darkness so complete that it is almost impossible for us to imagine. The medieval night was deep and absolutely dark. No streetlights, no bright screens, not even much moonlight in cities where buildings blocked the sky. The only sources of light were fires, candles, and oil lamps, and they were not used casually. A single candle could cost the equivalent of a day's work for an ordinary worker, making artificial light a luxury that most people used sparingly. Even wealthy merchants typically owned only 3 or 4 candles at a time. They were so valuable that some medieval wills specifically mentioned the inheritance of partially used candles. Without artificial light, people's sleep patterns naturally aligned with the setting and rising of the sun. The human body produces melatonin, our sleep hormone, when it gets dark. Medieval people received a pure dose of this natural sleep medicine every night. Their bodies were not confused by the blue light from screens, which can suppress melatonin production by up to 85%, according to recent studies. Darkness shaped medieval society in interesting ways. Cities had strict curfews, not just for safety, but because activities that required visual precision simply could not be done after dark. Workers of detailed crafts like embroidery or manuscript illumination were prohibited from working after sunset. Darkness affected trade as well. Many cities had specific prices for goods sold after nightfall. People developed an entire sensory world that modern humans have lost. They could identify others by footsteps, distinguish between different animals in complete darkness, and navigate through familiar spaces using only touch and sound. Darkness even affected architecture. Medieval builders designed houses with ingenious light wells and strategically positioned windows to maximize natural light during the day. Monasteries took darkness particularly seriously. Monastic records show elaborate systems for maintaining darkness in dormitories. Some monasteries even had designated guardians of darkness, whose job was to ensure that no unauthorized light disturbed the monks' sleep. The value of darkness was so ingrained in medieval culture that many cities had laws protecting it. Records from various European cities show fines for unnecessary lighting after certain hours. This deep darkness had significant effects on sleep quality. Without artificial light extending their days, medieval people typically spent 6 to 8 hours in natural darkness, even before trying to sleep. This prolonged period of darkness helped their bodies accumulate significant reserves of melatonin, leading to a deeper and more refreshing sleep. As the gentle darkness of medieval nights gave way to our artificially lit world, we lost something profound. However, there was another element of medieval sleep that worked in conjunction with this darkness: bed sharing. Privacy in medieval times meant something completely different. While we might hesitate at the idea of sharing our bed with strangers, medieval people did not think twice about it. In fact, sharing a bed was not only common, it was expected, practical, and sometimes even legally required. There are records of an innkeeper being fined for giving travelers separate beds when his inn was not full. The magistrate's decision stated that it is against custom and wastes good firewood to heat multiple chambers when guests can share heat. The practical benefits of bed sharing went beyond just staying warm. Medieval houses were not heated like modern homes. Most rooms had no heat source at all. The primary heating came from shared body heat. Domestic guides from the period described the ideal arrangement of sleepers, with the youngest, who generated more body heat placed in the middle. Monasteries had particularly well-documented sleep arrangements. Their records show monks sleeping 2 or 3 per bed, with strict rules about maintaining proper distance and dignity. The practice affected furniture design as well. Medieval beds were larger than modern ones, built to accommodate multiple sleepers. A standard merchant's bed was typically about 2.5 meters wide. This communal sleep had interesting social effects. There are mentions of conversations and agreements made in the communion of the bed, suggesting that these spaces were important for social bonding and business discussions. Children's sleep arrangements were particularly communal. Instead of having their own rooms, children typically slept in large groups. Medieval medical texts suggest that shared sleep was considered beneficial for mental health. Various physician guides recommend the comfort of shared rest as a treatment for melancholy or anxiety. One doctor wrote that solitary sleep generates solitary thoughts, while shared sleep brings shared peace. While sharing a bed with strangers may seem strange to us now, medieval people would probably find our insistence on sleeping alone equally bizarre. But there was more to the comfort of medieval sleep than just shared body heat. Before memory foam and spring mattresses, medieval people slept on something much simpler: fresh straw. Most medieval beds consisted of a wooden frame filled with straw, known as a straw mattress. Although it may seem primitive, this choice had notable benefits. Household records reveal the seasonal ritual of changing straw. Each harvest brought fresh straw to the bed. Wealthier families changed their straw more frequently, noting that fresh straw brings fresh dreams. There was an art to bed making. Professionals showed detailed instructions for laying out and arranging the straw in a way to create different levels of firmness. Some bedmakers became famous for their technique. These straw mattresses proved to be surprisingly adaptable. During hot summers, the straw could be packed loosely for better air circulation. In winter, tighter packing provided better insulation. Medical records from the period suggest that these firm straw beds may have been healthier than our ultra-soft modern mattresses. Medieval doctors noted fewer complaints about back pain among their patients. Cost records show that straw beds were remarkably economical. A year of fresh straw cost approximately the same as 2 days' wages for an average worker. Innovations in straw bed design show medieval ingenuity. Some beds had multiple layers of different types of straw. Others included aromatic herbs between the layers, lavender for relaxation, mint to deter pests, and rosemary, which was believed to prevent nightmares. Long before the shrill whistles of alarm clocks, medieval people mastered the art of waking up naturally. Their secret was that they did not fight against the natural rhythms of their bodies. Instead of forcing themselves to wake up at arbitrary times, they let the sun, the sounds, and their own internal clocks guide them. An intricate system of morning bells served as the community's time marker. Unlike modern alarms that shock you awake, these bells followed predictable patterns that people's bodies learned to anticipate. But medieval people did not depend only on bells. Raising roosters was not just for farmers. Municipal records show that urban families frequently kept roosters specifically as living alarm clocks. A medical guide notes that those who wake with the sun rise with clearer minds than those awakened by artificial means. The practice of natural awakening influenced architecture. Medieval builders positioned beds to catch the morning sun, with sleep chambers often facing east. Windows were strategically placed to catch the morning chorus of birds, nature's gentlest alarm clock. Work schedules adapted to this natural awakening pattern. Instead of rigid start times, medieval workdays began when workers naturally arrived, usually within an hour after sunrise. The absence of strict awakening times created interesting social patterns. A judge's decision dismissed a case about morning lateness, declaring that the sun and the body's readiness, not the clock, determined the proper time to begin. This natural approach to waking meant that medieval people rarely experienced that familiar modern panic of oversleeping. Without the concept of being late, sleep was more peaceful. A medieval saying captured this well: "The sun never fails to wake those who trust in it." The gentle transition from sleep to wakefulness was not the only natural aspect of medieval sleep. These people had other tricks up their sleeves, which came directly from their gardens. Instead of sleeping pills, people depended on carefully crafted herbal remedies, backed by generations of practical experience. Medieval healers had developed sophisticated herbal combinations for different types of sleep problems. In the 1400s, sleep gardens in monasteries revealed specific combinations of herbs grown by the monks. One particular garden contained 15 different varieties of sleep-promoting plants. Lavender topped the list of popular aids, but not just as a pleasant scent. Medieval healers used it in specific combinations: lavender mixed with rose petals for anxiety-related insomnia, or with chamomile for racing thoughts at night. Pillow sachets were particularly popular. People filled small fabric bags with dried herbs and placed them inside their pillowcases. Different combinations served different purposes: hops and lavender for deep sleep, rosemary and mint for those who needed to wake up early. These herbal traditions proved to be remarkably effective for most sleep problems. The notes of a medical guide state that sleep comes easily to those who trust nature's remedies instead of fighting against the night. Monasteries even developed early versions of sleep clinics where people could stay for a few nights of herb-assisted rest. While these gentle herbal approaches helped medieval people sleep, another aspect of their daily routine made falling asleep even easier. Late-night snacking simply was not a thing in medieval times, not because they did not want to, but because they could not. Without refrigeration or artificial light, eating after sunset became more trouble than it was worth. This limitation, although born of necessity, gave medieval people a significant advantage when it came to sleep quality. Medieval families followed strict mealtime patterns. The main meal, called dinner, typically happened around noon. A lighter supper followed in the late afternoon, well before sunset. Medieval doctors observed that patients who ate late frequently suffered from disturbed sleep and strange dreams. Monastery kitchens adhered strictly to feeding times aligned with daylight. The prohibition on late eating created interesting social customs. Evening gatherings focused on conversation and entertainment instead of food. Without late-night digestion to disturb their rest, medieval people typically slept more deeply. Beyond just promoting better sleep, this eating pattern created another benefit. Medieval people got their exercise simply by living. Daily life in medieval times involved constant physical activity from dawn to dusk, naturally tiring their bodies and preparing them for deep sleep. A typical farmer's day was essentially an intense full-body workout. These accidental fitness enthusiasts walked 16 to 20 kilometers a day just working in their fields. Artisans had their own workout routines built into their crafts. Blacksmiths essentially did arm training every day, swinging hammers that could weigh up to 4.5 kilos for hours. The seasons brought different types of physical demands. Spring meant intense agricultural work. Summer brought its own challenges with hay production. The autumn harvest was perhaps the most physically demanding season. Winter did not mean rest, just different types of physical work. This constant physical activity had a perfect side effect. By nightfall, medieval people were naturally tired. Their bodies had worked hard all day, making sleep come easily. But perhaps what is most interesting about medieval physical activity is not the exercise itself. It is how little they worried about it. Movement was so deeply interwoven into daily life that they never thought twice about it. Speaking of not overthinking things, medieval people had another secret for good sleep. Today we are obsessed with sleep. We track it, analyze it, and worry about it constantly. Medieval people would have laughed at our modern anxiety with sleep, and honestly, they would have been right. Back then, sleep was not a project to be managed or a skill to be mastered. It was just sleep. No one in medieval times ever lay awake wondering if they were getting enough REM cycles. They had only darkness, tired bodies, and the good sense to use both. The medieval approach to sleep was beautifully simple. When you are tired, you sleep. When you are not, you are awake. They did not need an app to tell them they were tired. Their bodies did that job very well. Monastery records show monks sometimes dozing during nightly prayers, and instead of fighting it, they simply took a quick nap. This relaxed attitude toward sleep actually helped them sleep better. Modern sleep research shows that anxiety about sleep is one of the greatest causes of sleep problems. The more you worry about not sleeping, the harder it becomes to sleep. A problem that medieval people simply did not have. They were too busy living to worry about sleeping. Medieval medical texts reveal another surprising detail. They rarely treated sleep problems. While they had remedies for everything, sleep problems were barely mentioned. When they discussed sleep problems, the usual prescription was simple: work harder during the day. No meditation apps, no white noise machines, just good old physical exhaustion. Something that is really interesting is that medieval people actually had names for different types of rest. They did not just sleep. They napped, rested, and slumbered, each type of rest serving its own purpose. They understood something we have forgotten. Not all rest needs to be deep sleep. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about medieval sleep was how ordinary they found it. It was not a hobby, a health metric, or a status symbol. No one bragged about their superior sleep hygiene. Sleep was just another part of life, like breathing or blinking. By not turning sleep into a complicated scientific project, medieval people avoided many of the sleep problems that afflict us today. Their accidental genius was in treating sleep as natural and normal, rather than something to be achieved or conquered. This medieval wisdom about not obsessing over sleep is now being rediscovered by modern experts. They are finding that one of the best ways to improve sleep is to stop trying so hard to improve it. In fact, the only time medieval people seem to have worried about sleep was when someone was sleeping too much, considered a sign of laziness or illness. And perhaps that was their greatest insight of all. That worry-free sleep was not just about how or where you slept, but about having a mind as peaceful as those silent medieval nights. Just as the medieval nights eventually gave way to dawn, this documentary also comes to its end. But the story of medieval sleep lives on, whispering secrets through the centuries to those willing to listen. In a world where we track every minute of our rest and worry about every nightly awakening, perhaps the greatest lesson our ancestors can teach us is simply this: trust your body, embrace the darkness, and let sleep come naturally. If you have come this far, it means that this journey through the past resonated with you in some way. Just as medieval communities gathered in the quiet hours to share stories and wisdom, we too have built a community here, of curious people seeking to better understand the world and themselves. If you are not yet part of it, consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. Each subscription allows us to continue exploring the fascinating mysteries of human history. And if this documentary illuminated something new for you, leave a comment sharing what most caught your attention, or perhaps even try sleeping a bit more like our medieval ancestors tonight. Until the next journey, sleep well.